But we did. It's all there. It's all there.
This is a real story of a real fraud.
That's the lowest point in my career that I went along with that paper.
Deliberate, high-level deception of the American people with disastrous consequences for its children's health. In order to give context to the extraordinary story that you're about to hear, a little historical perspective is important. Many of you will have heard of Tuskegee. Dirt-poor sharecroppers in Macon County, Alabama, black men with syphilis. From 1932, 339 men were told by the Public Health Service, the forerunner of today's CDC, that they had bad blood. The motive of public health doctors was to study the natural history of syphilis in the black man. Natural history in this case means deliberately untreated. These men were deliberately left untreated even when something as effective as penicillin came along. Worse still, those infected were actively prevented by public health doctors from getting this life-saving drug. Men suffered and died, women continued being infected, and babies continued to be born with congenital syphilis. A shiny new CDC took over in the late 1960s, refused to stop the experiment. Not until every last man had been opened up on their autopsy table. The experiment was stopped, not because the CDC realized the barbaric nature of their enterprise, but because a whistleblower by the name of Peter Buxton leaked the story to a journalist at the Washington Star. The story was published on July 25, 1972, hit the front page of the New York Times, and the experiment was stopped shortly thereafter. Congressional hearings followed. So unethical, so inhumane was this public health experiment that it led to a change in the CDC's code of medical ethics. Except it didn't. 30 years later, the CDC was to do something arguably far worse. Over a decade ago, Dr. Scott Montgomery and I put forward a hypothesis for MMR vaccine and autism. The age that you receive the vaccine influences the risk. This makes sense. For some infections like measles, the age of infection changes the outcome. We shared this hypothesis with vaccine officials, members of the Centers for Disease Control at meetings in Washington, D.C., and Cold Spring Harbor. A group of senior vaccine safety people at the CDC studied it. It panned out. We were right. At least partly. By November the 9th, 2001, nearly 13 years ago, senior CDC scientists knew that younger age of exposure to MMR was associated with an increased risk of autism. In 2004, they published, but they hid the results.
That's the lowest point in my career that I went along with that paper. And I went along with this. We didn't report significant findings.
MMR was declared safe.
The IOM has evaluated this issue back in 2004 and again most recently in 2011. And their conclusion, again, it was not just looking at the work that was done at CDC, but with the total body of evidence, was suggesting that vaccines and their components did not increase the risk for autism.
What Dr. Colleen Boyle, a co-author of that blighted paper, did not tell Congress is that she and her colleagues had deliberately concealed the autism vaccine link from the Institute of Medicine and the public. Ironically, they even received an award from the Secretary of Health and Human Services for this work. So troubling was the fraud that one of the CDC researchers broke ranks. Eventually he made contact with Dr. Brian Hooker, father of a vaccine-injured child with autism and a vaccine safety researcher.
I received a phone call out of the blue. It had a 404 area code, so I knew it was from the CDC. Lo and behold, it was. He had much to confess.
I'm completely ashamed of what I did. I have great shame now. I was complicit, and I went along with this.
had appointed me his priest. And when he appointed me his priest, then he started confessing. And we have had many, many phone exchanges. We've exchanged dozens of emails, and he has released quite compelling information regarding fraud and malfeasance in the CDC.
We didn't report significant findings.
Sent Hooker information that was never intended for public scrutiny. From their own data sheets dated 2001, Dr. Hooker analysed the CDC's results, and he found the same risk for autism that the CDC scientists had themselves identified.
It's all there. It's all there.
He confronted.
He has expressed significant remorse for lying, for burying data.
I have great shame now when I meet families with kids with autism, because I have been part of the problem.
This week, August the 10th, 2014, Dr. Hooker published the real findings. A 340% increased risk of autism in boys receiving the MMR on time compared with those receiving it later. 13 years and tens of thousands of children later. But as I've said, Dr. Montgomery and I were only partly right. The risk of autism from early MMR vaccination was seen in black children, black boys. Those boys, for some reason, are at very high risk. Consistent with the CDC's own findings, the rate of autistic regression in black children is reported to be twice that in white children.
Oh my God, I cannot believe we did what we did.
Tuskegee Revisited.
Now, this is a story of an amazingly beautiful young woman. She was training to be a pro football cheerleader, and she got a flu shot. She says that shot has destroyed her chances of happiness. We told you about her story last time. Now, Les Trent is with this woman for a first-hand look at what her life has become.
Right. She's the beautiful cheerleader whose heartbreaking story is shocking the nation. 25-year-old Desiree Jennings showed me how she can't walk without twisting, jerky movements. But she walks backwards normally. Doctors say she has a rare 1 in a million neurological disorder that was triggered 10 days after she got a seasonal flu shot.
Started with me not being able to eat without passing out.
You couldn't eat without passing out? I visited Desiree and her husband Brendan at their home in Ashburn, Virginia, to see what their daily life is like. She has to go up and down stairs backwards because something as simple as walking forward can be dangerous.
And here's the unusual part about the disorder. Take a look at this. Desiree can run just fine. It's only when she stops. You see, that's where the spasms start. Now you can walk backwards though, and it'll make it better, right?
Yeah.
She runs with a normal stride, and as I ran with her, she even spoke normally.
And now you can talk.
Yeah, it's weird. It fixes as soon as I start running.
I mean, you sound.
I know, it's great, isn't it?
You sound amazing. And then you stop, and that's what happens.
Desiree got a flu shot on August 23rd. 10 days later, she came down with what doctors have diagnosed as dystonia, a rare neurological disorder. Her jerking and twisting are the result of uncontrollable muscle contractions. There is no known cure.
Are y'all ready?
Yes.
This is home video of Desiree as a beautiful bride when she married Brendan 2 years ago. And this is a photo when she was training to be a cheerleader for the Washington Redskins. Doctors say what happened to Desiree should discourage people from getting flu shots. But here's what the woman who's on the wrong side of being 1 in a million says.
Running has to be a relief.
The only thing I have left.
The only thing you have left.
Seems to want to address that, or they say they've addressed it, and it's a closed issue, but it doesn't seem to be, because there are many people who will come out and say, no, I saw my kid change like overnight. I saw what happened, and I should have done something, and I didn't. So there's more to this than meets the eye, believe me.
Is that the experience you had, Robert? Something changed overnight?
My wife says that. I don't remember, but my child is autistic. And every kid is different. But there is something there. There's something there that people aren't addressing. And for me to get so upset here today, on the Today Show with you guys, means there's something there. That's all I wanted, was the movie to be seen. People can make their own judgment, but you must see it. And there are other films, other things that also just document and show. You know, it's not such a simple thing.
Do you regret?
Camera. Camera. Camera.
Ya aslında çok haklı. Ben dövmeyi basmadım.
Güzel olmak.
Peace. How y'all doing? This is ZaZa Ali. Today is Thursday, October 26th. What's good? I pray that this message reaches you in the best of health, spirit, and mind. I am doing great. Before I get into this, I meant to say this yesterday and got caught up in my excitement about what I was, studying and researching. But I did surpass 20,000 subscribers a couple of days ago. And I am extremely thankful and honored to have, I would have been honored to have 2,000 people continuously listening to me, but to have 20,000 subscribers, that I have access to your time and your mind and your attention. I am extremely thankful and honored. You know, I know in the bigger scheme of things, it may mean something, it may not mean anything, but I just wanted to, congratulate us for reaching that milestone, because it is a milestone for me. I want to say something real quick before I get into this topic. I decided to talk about this because I do get continuously emails or messages on Facebook, YouTube, etc. about vaccinations, parents who are concerned, who don't really know what to do, and who are getting sprinkled information from different places and don't really have clarity about exactly what's going on as far as vaccines or options that they may or may not have as far as what they can do. So before I get into that real quick, I just wanted to address something. Number one, I am not a doctor. All of the information that I have studied and researched over the past 10 to 15 years has come from a multitude of scientists, people with personal experiences and testimonies, and just my own, personal experience with what I've seen with, the United States government, the World Health Organization, what I've studied about Bill and Melinda Gates, what I've discovered and researched about vaccinations in general. And I have an entire section about vaccines in my first book entitled The Scientific Intervention in Our Affairs. And I wanted to write this and talk about this because I feel like it's very important for us to arm ourselves with truth. I don't try to promote fear. I just try to provide information and let people judge the information themselves. Unfortunately, a lot of us are asleep at the switch when we come to understand what this government is capable of and what their intentions are. And that's why I put that video in there that started off with the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, because we think that these things happened. If you read Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington and find out what they were doing to slaves, particularly women, it is astounding how diabolical and wicked these scientists can be. And then looking at the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, we think that those things were happening back in the day and it doesn't really apply anymore. No, it's happening now, and unfortunately it's gotten a lot worse. That's the bad side of it. The flip side of that is because this is the age of technology and information, we can learn about anything that we want to learn about. And anytime my son faces any ailments or anytime I have discomfort, I automatically look for holistic, natural healing methods. So if you are experiencing dis-ease or any level of discomfort in your body, anything that you're suffering with physically, you should be online looking for holistic ways of healing your body and healing whatever your condition is. So just to put it out there, like I said, I'm not telling you to not get vaccinated. I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm telling you to look at the facts and make a conscious, intelligent decision for yourself. And what I can tell you in no uncertain terms is that there is a very large scale population control agenda, and we can see it through vaccinations. We can see it through all of the pollution and toxins that are in our water, that are in our air, that are in our food supply. We think that these things are just derivatives of human beings, but they're not. There is a full-scale war on humanity. And so, well, you say that, why would you not tell people not to vaccinate? Because I don't tell people what to do. We have got to become intelligent, critical thinkers to be able to make decisions on our own. And this is what was pivotal about this situation in Houston. And this was really what was pivotal about Hurricane Katrina and a lot of different things that we've experienced. Nobody is coming to save you, any of us. That shouldn't scare you. That should empower you. That should make you be forthright in how you move. Be intelligent with how you move. We have got to be able to think our way out of any situation. So that's what this video is about. I could tell you, don't vaccinate. Yes. I'm going to arm you with the information and let you make an intelligent decision. And then also, I don't want nobody going back and saying ZaZa Ali told me to do this and then this happened and that, you know what I mean? Trying to point the finger at me, because unfortunately we do that. We look for scapegoats and we look for people to tell us what to do and how to do it. And then when it doesn't pan out, we're looking for somebody to blame. We need thinkers. We need critical thinkers. We need people who are striving to lead themselves. That's the warning for all of us. With everything that we've been through, everything that we've witnessed, you have to be able to lead yourself. If I can be of assistance to you, then all praise is due to the Creator. The situation right now with the vaccinations, California, first of all, let me say thank you to Reverend Phil Valentine and Dr. Delbert Blair, who were both very instrumental in me going into the root and the science of vaccinations and, you know, what they're doing and the real agenda behind that. I got much love for those brothers as far as those things that I was able to pull from them to help me in my journey as far as research, as well as a number of other, scientists and whatnot. But those two in particular sparked something in me. And then also the Nation of Islam, who last year, took the initiative to expose the CDC here in Atlanta. They did some marches and protesting and talked about the MMR vaccination scandal and how MMR vaccinations, which is the measles vaccination, was had a very detrimental effect on Black boys in particular. Now, this information has been out for a long time now, as far as MMR vaccinations, as far as them particularly harming Black boys. But the Nation of Islam last year was very prevalent in coming out and helping our people to be more conscious about vaccinations, to help them to make a decision about, whether or not they were going to have their children vaccinated. So one thing I want to point out is that, remember in 2000, I think it was 2014, they had the big measles scare in Los Angeles.
The Disneyland measles outbreak is spreading fear this morning well beyond California. One victim traveled to the Seattle area for the holidays, flying there and back to California on 2 different airlines. The woman in her 20s is not vaccinated. Carter Evans reports she's the latest example of a controversial trend.
The measles outbreak at Disneyland has proven it's a small world after all. Health officials now say 26 cases in 4 states have been linked to visits to the park in mid-December. Of those infected, more than half were not vaccinated.
Around the world, we've seen big outbreaks of measles. There's more of a chance the virus coming to us. On the other hand, the other issue that we know is that some communities are certainly seeing immunization rates drop. And so there's a combination there of risk factors.
Here in the U.S., measles infections have skyrocketed. More than 600 cases were reported last year, the highest number since 2000. The virus is highly contagious and can take up to 12 days to show up. Symptoms include cough, fever, and a rash. The resurgence of this disease, once believed to have been eliminated, has doctors concerned.
Getting everybody vaccinated is so important because trying to contain these infections can really be difficult. There's a lot of information out there that can be confusing or contradictory, and if people don't get immunized as a result, that's a problem.
Skipping shots has become a growing trend in parts of California. Last year, parents turned in more than 13,000 personal belief exemptions, informing the state that their children would be opting out of recommended vaccines. That's more than twice the number of kids who aren't fully vaccinated compared to 10 years ago.
They said that a bunch of people who went to Disneyland had gotten impacted by measles. They caught measles, and that I think 12 of the children had gotten who were unvaccinated, had not been vaccinated, caught measles. So basically, what they were saying was that people who were not vaccinated were becoming a health threat to the broader community because they were allowing for the measles disease to be spread. The outbreak breaks out in Los Angeles, and then you fast forward the next year, California law SB 277 comes up, which basically makes it mandatory for children who are in public and private schools, and I do believe it's homeschool children as well, if you are registered with the state of California, mandatory for your child to be vaccinated unless they have specific medical exemptions. This means that you cannot get a, say that you have a religious belief or a personal belief against vaccinations, that is mandatory for your child to be vaccinated. That is one of the reasons why I left California, because I had a long-standing exemption on file with California as far as my son not being vaccinated. And when that law passed, they gave people who had a ongoing exemption on file, they gave you additional time in order to get vaccinations, but after a certain cutoff date, you weren't going to be able to get them. So I was like, no, not having my son vaccinated. And that was a part of the reason why I left from California, because I know that there is something bigger happening behind the scenes. So then you fast forward, now it's coming out that, and they said that in LA, the LA Times wrote an article and said that there's been more medical exemptions now because of, the new California law. They think that they're finding doctors who are willing to give them these exemptions or whatever. But understand, California, like New York, California and New York mostly are what you call the anchor states of this country. They set the trends and the tone for most of things that happen in pop culture, as well as legal situations for everybody else. So we always said it's, as California goes, so goes the nation. So California is just the starting point. And you have to look at the timing of this measles outbreak in California. You haven't heard anything else about it, right? They made this big deal about, I think they said it was 59 people who were contracted the measles. One person died, allegedly. You never hear anything about the person who died. See, this is how we have to start looking at these situations. Just because they tell you something don't mean it's actually real. So one person died. 59 people contracted the disease. 12 of them were children who did not have vaccinations. So why did it stop? Why weren't we seeing measles pop up in all of the places that those children and those people went back to? They give you these thrusts of information and then it dies out, like the West Nile virus, like Ebola, etc. So you have the Los Angeles outbreak, then the law passes. But notice, since this law was passed in 2015, there has not been any public movement or media attention on the fact that Black boys are developing autism, and it is directly tied to this MMR vaccination. Now, Tony Braxton, as well as Holly Robinson Peete, they both have sons that have, or children, I should say, that have autism. Tony Braxton said in her memoir, Unbreak My Heart, she said vaccinations may be to blame for her son's autism. Maybe it's just a coincidence that after my son's MMR vaccine, I began to notice changes in him. Holly Robinson Peete, it says the actress lashed out at pro-vaxxer Amanda Peete in an Essence opinion piece. Peete, who has an autistic son, wrote, "If I could talk to Amanda Peete, I would say that I'm glad your child was able to tolerate that level of toxicity, but don't expect me, after witnessing what vaccinations did to my son, to inoculate my other children under the same circumstances." Now, I watched about 4 or 5 videos yesterday on YouTube. And it's really, really just so sad. Videos of people who, and you can go on YouTube and just look up before and after vaccination. People who had videos and pictures of their children as babies, laughing, happy, smiling, dancing, playing. And then after this MMR vaccination or other vaccinations, their children lost all the life in their eyes. They stopped playing. They only wanted to watch TV. They started hitting and having temper tantrums and things like that. For there not to be a large-scale dialogue nationally and even globally, and then also for the mainstream news to not pick this up, you have to know that there's something deeper going on here. This is what I always say, watch what it is that mainstream media is talking about versus what they're not talking about, because you can learn a lot about the agenda. So, you know, you have Tony Braxton, you have Holly Robinson Peete, and you have a multitude of people who have come publicly and talked about the before and after of their children. And the other question is, you know, they talked about how in California, you know, unvaccinated children were this threat, but how can children who are not vaccinated be a threat to children who are? I looked at the numbers. There is a map. Let me pull it up real quick. There's a map that shows states with states that have exemptions, and then you can hover over the state and it will tell you how many children, what the percentages of that child, that state, and how many MMR vaccines have been had versus how many have not. And most of the states are above 95%. So this argument that non-vaccinated children are somehow a detriment to the health of the broader community, it doesn't even make sense. Also in Kenya, let me just pull this up real quick, because recently Jamaica, hold on, let me read this article. Jamaica recently talked about making the HPV vaccine mandatory. It says, as the Ministry of Health administers the human papilloma virus or HPV vaccines in schools today, Health Minister Dr. Christopher Tufton said it is of equal importance to make sure that parents fully understand and appreciate the benefits of having their children vaccinated. Tufton said, however, that provision is being made to give parents the option to decline and not allow their children to participate. The ministry announced last Friday that more than 20,000 girls in grade 7 in schools island-wide will be introduced to the vaccine. The vaccine is expected to assist in preventing cervical cancer. Cancer of the cervix is the second most common cancer in Jamaican women after breast cancer. Now that right there should be a red flag for anyone that is actually in Jamaica, because cancer is not a genetically passed on disease. So anywhere there are high rates of cancer, especially cervical cancer and breast cancer, which means that it's specifically targeting girls and women, you have to look at the train of vaccination that girls and women are girls particularly received there maybe 10 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. You also have to look at what's in the water. You also have to look at what's in the soil. And of course, we know because chemtrails are being sprayed all over the world, some of the chemicals that are in chemtrails are directly connected to carcinogens or cancer-creating elements, toxins. So that's number one. Before you even get to the HPV virus, what is actually happening there that is causing such high rates of cancer in women? That's what the scientists and the doctors and the thinkers, critical thinkers in Jamaica should be working on and looking at right now. And then the second thing is even the conversation of having a mandatory vaccination in Jamaica should raise a red flag. In Kenya, this was, let me see, back in 2016, I believe. Last year, or maybe it was the year before, a mass sterilization exercise, Kenyan doctors find anti-fertility agent in UN tetanus vaccine. It says Kenyans Catholic bishops are charging 2 United Nations organizations with sterilizing millions of girls and women under cover of an anti-tetanus inoculation program sponsored by the Kenyan government. Sponsored by the Kenyan government. According to a statement released Tuesday by the Kenya Catholic Doctors Association, the organization has found an antigen that causes miscarriages in a vaccine being administered to 2.3 million girls and women by the World Health Organization and UNICEF. Priests throughout Kenya reportedly are advising their congregations to refuse the vaccine. He says, we sent samples, from around Kenya to laboratories in South Africa. They tested positive for HCG antigen. They were all laced with ACG. HCG is a antigen, like he said, for lack of a better word, that has been directly connected with forced abortions and having women who have had miscarriages when being having this particular chemical given to them through vaccinations or different methods. It says this proved our worst fears. This is who the World Health Organization. This campaign is not about eradicating neonatal tetanus, but a well-coordinated, forceful population control mass sterilization exercise using a proven fertility regulating vaccine. This evidence was presented to the Ministry of Health before the 3rd round of immunization, but was ignored. Now, when I looked this story back up, because I talk about this in my book, and I also used to talk about this in my lectures. When I put it in, like 5 websites at the top of the screen popped up, basically trying to debunk this story. So you have to be very careful online when you are searching information, because they have a machine that is predicated on miseducating people about vaccination. Another thing that I wanted to say, in Houston, they sprayed all of those chemicals after Tropical Storm Harvey in order to under the guise of preventing mosquitoes. So they just did a mass spraying toxins over the whole population of Houston. Whatever their agenda was, that is definitely something that we need to remember. We need to make a footnote of that, because there may be health ramifications. And then anyone in Houston needs to do a full body detox and continuously do detoxes, as well as doing fasts, as well as not drinking the tap water, as well as making sure that you are eating foods that are going to promote health and well-being, opposed to processed foods, etc.